Devers from Student Health and Wellbeing. I use she, her pronouns. With me today is Chuck Burgess from the Counseling Center. Chuck uses he, him pronouns and is here to talk with me today about staying motivated. So, what exactly is motivation?
Sure. So when I think about motivation, essentially, I think about it as our desire to do something. If you think about watching a movie or a story or something, you might think about a character's motivation. Essentially, it's the reason they might do things. From a psychological perspective, we can think about really two basic sources of motivation. So we would break those down into intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is probably the one that we're most familiar with. We're doing something because of a external cause, something outside of ourselves. Either we're trying to accomplish or achieve a desired outcome, or perhaps we're trying to avoid a bad outcome. Intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes more from kind of inside ourselves. You might think about something that you do just for the pure enjoyment of doing it, or the sense of satisfaction that you get from doing it. Probably nobody pays you to do a crossword puzzle or finish, one of those like mindful coloring books, but it feels good doing it. And that good feeling is what keeps you doing it. So that's kind of that intrinsic motivation piece. One other thing I definitely want to talk about when we talk about motivation is, people will sometimes just say that motivation is something they just don't have. It's kind of related to like self-control or like willpower. In that way, it seems like we have this sense that those are things that we either have or don't have. But actually what a lot of the research tells us is that those things are actually trainable. It's not that some people are born with willpower and self-control and motivation and some aren't. It's that people vary in their kind of capacity or ability to do those things. But overall, you know, we can actually work at those things and strengthen them and build them up, just like you might build up your cardiovascular health or physical strength.
So, whether it's related to schoolwork, health goals, or something else, how can you push yourself to keep going when you just really don't feel like it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say that, sometimes feeling like you just don't want to, you just don't want to do it right now. That's totally normal. That's totally natural and healthy. It happens to everybody. And one thing to keep in mind is that, personally speaking, kind of mentally speaking, the time that it takes kind of the most effort on our part to do something is the very beginning. So getting started is often a lot more difficult or requires a lot more energy, kind of mental and emotional energy, than just continuing on a project. It's kind of like inertia, where it's a lot harder to get an object moving than it is to kind of keep an object in motion. And so we can kind of use that to help ourselves out. If I'm in a place where I really just don't feel like doing something, but I know I've got something that needs to get done, instead of getting overwhelmed or caught up thinking about like, oh, I've got this whole big thing that needs to get done and I just don't feel like it. If we can kind of shift our perspective to focusing on, okay, how can I just get myself started on this? How can I just get over that kind of initial hump? Because once I do that, I know it'll get easier. And so there's a few techniques that I like to talk about related to that idea of, okay, how do I just get myself started? One really well known, kind of technique that I like to talk to people about is SMART goals. So the SMART goal framework is essentially a way of breaking, maybe kind of larger tasks down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
What about distractions? How do you avoid distractions on the path to achieving your goals?
Yeah, man. So distractions are another thing that, given everything we've been doing over the last year, it's much easier to, get distracted during a lecture or, a meeting or something like that. The fact that we're doing everything online right now, you know, if we're doing these things through like our computers or our phones, like we just have access to, you know, the best distraction of all, which is the internet. We have this kind of unlimited supply of distractions. And so, I would say the best way to avoid distractions is to take steps to remove your access to those distractions when you are needing to actually buckle down and do something. Maybe one last tip is you can also think about building habits, getting yourself into a routine, just like how we talk about sleep hygiene and building habits related to going to sleep. You can think about making habits out of going to work. Even though we don't often, leave our houses and go to a classroom, you can still think about kind of creating a workspace for yourself in your room, and primarily as much as possible, making only work happen there so that when I'm sat at my desk, when I have my laptop open, it's time for work now. It's certainly not a quick fix. It really is going to take some time and effort to build that habit. But, again, it takes the most effort early on when we're doing something. So it is going to be hard when you're trying to establish that routine or that habit. But, once it's in place, it's something that might actually help you out, and it might be something that helps kind of support you staying motivated and doing what you need to do.